Joe Rogan fact-checks ladies' claims on the Book of Enoch with Wes Huff. Christian apologist. I came across this YouTube video, or this Facebook video, sorry. The link will be in the description if you want to watch the original. But Sam Shimon passed it along, and there is a episode where Joe Rogan is speaking to a lady about Enoch and why it didn't make it into the canon, and then he keeps bringing Wes Huff's name up. You know, Wes Huff has become his go-to Bible guru expert. He wants to know anything about the Bible, he goes to Joe Rogan. Goes to Wes Huff. So if you were hoping that maybe someday Joe Rogan might connect directly with a critical scholar who's not selling him apologetics, you might want to throw that out the window. So we're going to react to this young man's reaction to Joe Rogan and eventually Wes Huff and the conversations about Enoch. But I noticed something, because some videos I just blindly react to. I came across this. This you're going to want to stick around for, because I think Joe Rogan believes something even far more wild than what Alex O'Connor and me and Neil Gnostic and Foreman and all of us were doing when we were critiquing his understanding of word for word Isaiah miracle back when he first spoke to Wes Huff. It may be a little nuttier than that. So stay tuned and tell me what you think by the end of this episode. Subscribe, like, share, check it out. Let's see what happens.
Ethiopian Orthodox text. It's basically kind of like a mainline OG version of the Bible. And then sometime in the 4th century, there was actually a group that came together and they removed certain books. But the story goes that Revelations actually had replaced Enoch. You know, why remove a book from a Bible, right?
Did Wes Huff, did he touch on that? That's the guy to talk to.
That's the guy to talk to.
Great grandfather of Noah, Enoch, as this character who is explaining some of these fallen angels or beings. Part of the confusion about the Book of Enoch is because the Book of Enoch is never considered scripture by the Jews, but ends up in the Ethiopian Bible.
There's a reason, clearly, that it didn't end up in our canon, but we'll get to that.
Rogan fact checks this lady by saying, you need to talk to Wes Huff. And oh my goodness, the crowd goes wild. This is so cool.
This poor kid. If this kid watches this, listen, man, no offense personally. You're just, obviously an excited Christian, but take some notes. Let's see where this goes.
The fact that Joe Rogan is like, ask Wes Huff on this, because this lady brings up the topic of the Book of Enoch, and she's like, why in the world is it taken out of the Bible? And that's just not true. It was never taken out of the Bible. It was never put in the Bible in the first place.
Yeah,
but
it was never put in the Bible in the first place. Meaning the canon, which developed much later. Why? Why would you not include Enoch in your Bible? What the heck? Especially since we know Jude directly quotes it. What's up with that?
Besides the Ethiopian Bible, so she thinks the Ethiopian Bible is the oldest, but it's just not true. So we're going to be reacting to this video of Joe Rogan.
No, the Ethiopian Bible we have may not be the oldest, but Enoch became part of their canon, reached that area likely before the canonization of the 4th century within Roman Christian circles.
Joe Rogan calling out this lady and saying, you need to talk to Wes Huff. And then we're going to go to a video of Wes Huff explaining the Book of Enoch and why it is not in the Bible. Let's get into it.
To think that we are the only, life form on this planet or in this galaxy, I think is a little bit crazy, given, the fact that I also think God exists and that there's other creations. But then again,
take God out of the picture for our sake. We would think there are conditions from which life would emerge in this universe, as vast as it is. Of course, I do think there's probably life out there. If Mars just so happens to potentially have life and it's our next door neighbor in terms of planets, I imagine life somehow, shape or form, some way, shape or form, has emerged somewhere along this enormous universe.
And you get into this aspect of, you know, why is it that you also have this aspect of, you know, a certain religion that has been very controlled and I think rolled out in a certain aspect. And, you know, when you have certain books that are removed because they don't think that people should have access to this information or know it, you know, why remove a book from a Bible, right?
Did Wes Huff, did he touch on that? Did he talk about that? Or are there people that don't believe the Book of Enoch was really a part of the Bible?
This is amazing. He brings Wes Huff up, and we're going to play Wes Huff actually explaining this because we all need to know. She's making wild claims saying that they took the Book of Enoch out of the Bible and saying the Ethiopian Bible is the oldest. And it's just...
Well, this young man who's reacting to them, and I'm reacting to him, of course, I don't know. He probably knows that Enoch is quoted in Jude in the Bible. That is canon. But I don't know if this young man has any clue how significant Enoch was for even Christian theology, biblical Jewish and Christian theology. But yeah, the Jews did not include it in their canon, and the Christians considered the Old Testament the Jewish canon of the Old Testament. So they just went with the Jewish program, so to speak. And that's how they ended up forming out their books.
It's just not true.
Missing books.
Yeah,
I think we brought it up, but I don't remember how.
That's the guy to talk to.
Yeah, so what I gather...
That's the guy to talk to about, you know what I mean? Because you have to really understand the history of the Bible to be able to figure out what, you know, like what's legitimate, what's not, why they put it into the New Testament. I had some very erroneous ideas about it until I talked to it.
So there's this idea that Enoch's not legitimate, as if Enoch is, you know, somehow taboo or not really considered inspired, if you will. And if that's the case, then why would Jude quote it, right? Early church fathers, Justin Martyr and others, saw the same kind of worldview that Enoch portrays, fallen angels sleeping with mortal women, the whole nine. And they're called fallen angels in their language, right? So you have this Enochian type of understanding of Genesis that isn't a pure sons of God comes down, daughters of men, etc. That interpretive lens is Enochian in a sense.
To intelligent people.
That's so amazing, Wes Huff. That's so amazing. Joe Rogan is literally admitting, and he's come so far. He went from saying the Bible's full of BS, and now he's saying, you got to talk to some Christians here because I used to think some crazy stuff.
So this kid is like throwing me for a loop here. The Bible's BS is a whole different question from why Enoch's not in the canon. And if Enoch is thrown out for its BS, then most of the Bible should be thrown out for its BS. That's the honest truth. Seems like this kid is against the Book of Enoch, as if Enoch's not good. But I don't know if he realizes how much influence there is likely, and we know definitively with Jude, but likely in other places within the New Testament, based on Enoch itself, the influence of Enoch's material. And yeah, there are various stages of the book, so but we'll see. Really know the history of it, and it's very strange stuff.
Well, so from what I gather, and by the way, I'm not a theologian in any capacity, but just from my personal opinion on this. So you have the Ethiopian Orthodox
being a theologian's not something to brag about, in my opinion, but I get it, you know, unless you're like really critical. But yeah,
text, which has I think 88 books of the Bible in total, but in the Ethiopian Orthodox text, it's basically kind of like a mainline OG version of the Bible. And then sometime in the 4th century, there was actually a group that came together and they removed certain books. And the story goes that Revelations actually had replaced Enoch.
What?
And so it's interesting because when you're looking kind of full circle on, you know, you hear the stuff that some of these people are talking about, and then you see and you read the Book of Enoch, which is a wild read, okay? And then you look at kind of what our modern day description is of what angels and entities are versus what Enoch was seeing and reporting in his language and ability at that time. I think that there's a lot that brings you to then ask the question, well, why would they remove this information? If it's truly, you know, written in part of the oldest Bible in the world, why would they then take it out and water it down? And I'm not saying that you can't find God through the new Bible, right? Like everyone's on their own spiritual journey, and I think everyone can pray and you can access God, but...
Seriously, where did you get this information to say that it was replaced by revelation. No, absolutely not true. And we see the Ethiopian Bible is nowhere close to be the oldest Bible there is. The Sinaiticus Bible is way older, found in, I believe, the 4th century, and the Book of Enoch's not in there. It's the entire Bible.
So pause for 1 second here. I do not particularly know, and I would refer to experts on, Ethiopian canon and Ethiopian literature and how early these Christians would have had this. And I did a quick little ChatGPT. You can never know if that's true or not. It'll take you to Wikipedia, of course, if you're interested in actually diving deeper in here. And you can. Orthodox Tawahedo Biblical Canon. This is a version of Christian Bible used in 2 Oriental Orthodox churches of the Ethiopian and Eritrean traditions. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tawahedo Church, let's see, Old Testament. And it tells you what their Old Testament is, which I believe includes Enoch. But there's also other Maccabees, of course, all of that. Let's see. 81. So the broader canon adds to the 81 books of the Tawahedo Bible the following. First books, let's see. Does it say when? Does this Wikipedia say when? So I was looking, ChatGPT was saying ultimately that the Christianization, so when did the canon form? Here are key markers. Christianization of the kingdom of Aksum, Ethiopia, under King Ezana in the 4th century of the Common Era, 330s, the 4th century, marks the rise of the EOTC as an institution. Manuscript evidence and research show that by the medieval period, approximately 13th to 15th centuries, many of the additional books were already in use in Ethiopia and had de facto canonical status. However, there's no clear record of a single synod or council that formally and universally declares this list as final. According to one study, it seems that the canon of the EOTC is neither open nor closed. So it's hard to know when exactly or how old, but I imagine scholars tend to say that they ended up getting the Book of Enoch before the Roman, if you will, the Sinaiticus Bible that we have in the 4th century. In the 5th century canons, of course, don't include it, but the Ethiopians include this as scripture as part of their scriptures.
I just find that very interesting. And so what I will say is that I like to have the whole kind of picture in front of me. And so I feel like to fully understand A through Z, you kind of have to be able to read it.
So while she may be mistaken, this kid is looking for everything to make the Bible true. She may be mistaken about Revelation being exchanged for Enoch or whatnot. I don't know who this person is. I don't know their thoughts, but sounds like they're open to various explanations that might not be the one that they've been told, and give some factual data that scholarship tends to say. I mean, I don't see the big deal here, but let's see what happens.
Yeah, I just don't know about the history of it. Is there any debate about the reality of that book? Is there any debate about whether or not it was either fraudulent or discredited or something?
The Book of Enoch?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Like, why did they... Because I know there was some kind of controversy that Wes Huff described. I just can't remember it.
I just looked through a transcript real quick. I didn't see.
Yeah, they don't discuss that. But as far as Enoch itself being, there may have been some Christians who've been suspect of that. Some people may have been suspect. I imagine Jews were suspect that Enoch wrote this material. I mean, Enoch supposedly lives before the flood, right? So did Enoch really write this? It's pseudepigraphy. It's not actually Enoch writing this material. That may be one of the factors as to why Jews did not include it into their canon. They were still writing Enoch books. There also was a competitive nature between Jewish sects. I believe, I cannot remember the exact name of the scholar, but he believed there were 5 books of Moses and 5 books of Enoch. And there was this Enochian Judaism competition, so to speak, over Moses or Enoch as the chief figure. I can't remember the scholar's name off the top of my mind. It's been a long time since I even cracked open the book, and I haven't finished his book. But there is Enochian Judaism versus Mosaic Judaism, and that was something prior to Jesus that was already going on, according to the scholar.
see you guys discussing Enoch. We're discussing Isaiah and then the Dead Sea Scrolls and stuff like that. I didn't see Enoch discussion.
No, it must have been me privately talking to him about something.
We're going to go to a video of Wes Huff explaining the Book of Enoch on another podcast. There are some controversies. The Book of Enoch, at least the first one, was written, yes, 300 years probably, or the oldest one we have is 300 years before Jesus. And then the other ones were written during the time of Jesus.
Not all.
Completely impossible.
So there's the Book of the Watchers, which is book 1. But then there, I believe, is book 3 is the... can't remember the exact name. What are the 5 books? What are the 5 books of Enoch? And when were they written? According to critical scholars. Okay, so here we go. 5 books of Enoch. I figured the first, so you got 1 Enoch to distinguish it from 2nd Enoch, which is Slavonic, and 3rd Enoch, Hebrew. 1st Enoch, the Book of the Watchers, is book 1, or chapters 1 through 36, tells the story of the fallen angels, watchers who descend to earth. We get this in the book of Jude. We also have hints elsewhere in Christian theology, and early church fathers know this theology as well. So they're influenced by Enoch's theology. Explains the origin of evil, etc. It's dated to around 300 to 200 BCE. The book of parables, or the similitudes, so that's chapters 37 to 71, and that is supposedly sometime 1st century BC, the 40s BCE, up to the 70s CE of the Common Era. So it could have been, 50 to 70 years before Jesus. The astronomical book, or Book of the Luminaries, 72 to 82, that one is supposed to be pretty old. It might actually be, 250s BCE to 200 BCE. So it's a very old section that has been inserted in the 5 books canon, if you will, of Enoch. The Book of Dreams, 1 Enoch 83 to 90, written around 165 to 140 BCE, around the Maccabean revolt. And then the 5th one is the Epistle of Enoch, and that's 91 to 108, and that one is roughly around 150 to 50 BCE. So most of these books in the Book of Enoch, the 5 books of Enoch, were written before Jesus. Maybe even all of them were written before Jesus. Jesus could have been 50 to 60, 70 years after the youngest book that they have within that canon.
Impossible for Enoch actually to write it. Not unless, obviously, they preserved over time, whatever, but we don't know if it's true or not.
So, with that being said, I'd want early church fathers speaking about that way. I wouldn't rule out the reason it didn't make it into canon is because, church fathers saw that this was so young and they just wrote it 70 years ago, or they just wrote it 300 years ago. Enoch existed way back here. Give me the church fathers who are suspect of that. And there probably are a few people who've made comments along the way about Enoch's status, that Enoch probably didn't write it. But for the most part, I think it was the fact that Jews did not include it into their scripture, and Christians used the Jewish Old Testament as a foundation for their canonical biblical corpus, or I'm using the word corpus because that's what I hear all the time, and people like Jordan Peterson say corpus, but yeah, like they went with what the Jews picked as their Old Testament.
Another video that I watched, the thing about,
and it may have been because Jews were not fans of its apocalyptic fervor after the Roman Jewish War and the 135, what we saw. With the Jewish revolt again under Judas Maccabees. Sorry, is it Judas Maccabees? Bar Kokhba, sorry. When you have this fervor, this the world's going to end any moment. We've got to do something about it. Apocalyptic or political drives that we see Jews had, they probably were done with any push to try and drive that apocalypticism even more. That's probably why Daniel also gets demoted, along with other reasons, but it may have played a significant role why Jews were not fans of putting it at such a high place within their scriptures or their sacred lore.
Like what Wes Huff does that's so interesting is like he he really understands like the history of the text, the language in which they use, the names in which they chose. And when he breaks it out, one of the things he told us that was the craziest was that the book of Isaiah was exactly the same in the Dead Sea Scrolls as it was 1,000 years later. They found one that was 1,000 years older, and it was direct. It was word for word, verbatim. I'm like, that's bananas.
Okay, you really have to catch this part. This is if there's anything I've said, this is probably the most important part out of all of them. You remember the whole Alex O'Connor and me and Neil from Gnostic Informant were doing our jabs at Wes Huff about this whole word for word the same. And he's like, word for word? He's like, word for word. And then he did this makeup video. I didn't mean word for word literally. I meant practically 5 to 10% of it is practically word for word literally, but 5 to 10% off. Well, we did that because the way that Joe Rogan, and of course his millions and millions of people are getting ill-informed when they hear this and taking it literally, Joe Rogan seemed to have thought this was a miracle, right? And we're like, why did he have the impression that the preservation of an ancient manuscript or tradition of Isaiah is miraculous? What gave him this impression? Listen to what he says again. He still seems to have this impression.
Of Isaiah was the thing about like what Wes Huff does that's so interesting is like he really understands like the history of the text, the language in which they use, the names in which they chose. And when he breaks it out, one of the things he told us that was the craziest was that the book of Isaiah was exactly the same in the Dead Sea Scrolls as it was 1,000 years later.
Okay, so the book of Isaiah that you find in the Dead Sea Scrolls is exactly the same that you find much later, right? We're talking the Masoretic text.
Found one that was 1,000 years older.
1,000 years older.
And it was direct. It was word for word, verbatim.
Word for word, verbatim. And you go, huh? Okay, yeah. Yeah. You've got the Masoretic text that was obviously developed later, but there's a tradition behind it. Joe does not seem to have the impression that there were Jews that were rigorous and religiously, their entire system was about preserving a manuscript tradition that goes far back, and someone established it, and they continued a tradition. For over 1,000 years, they kept the preservation of this text. The same way you would find today Muslims do with the Quran, is that Joe seems to have this idea that they miraculously have the same, like they somehow produced Isaiah and they didn't have any Isaiah to work from. And they have word for word the exact Isaiah that they had 1,000 years before, 1,000 years later. And that we have now discovered with the Dead Sea Scrolls and proven, holy smokes, how did the Masoretic text get word for word, or very close, that Dead Sea Scroll material? Sounds like Joe Rogan actually believes that there's no continuity with the textual tradition of them preserving it. No miracles needed, ladies and gentlemen. It clearly is Jews practicing just preserving the material. It's that simple.
I'm like, that's bananas. 1,000.
And he's still quoting that is amazing from Wes Huff.
The same written that they didn't know there was a version of it 1,000 years ago, and then they find it in these caves.
It's confirmed.
So see what he's saying here? Listen to it carefully.
Story that's exactly the same written. Bananas. 1,000.
And he's still quoting that is amazing from Wes Huff.
Year-old story that's exactly the same written that they didn't know there was a version of it 1,000 years ago, and then they find it in these caves.
It's confirmed
in Qumran.
in text.
It's
yeah.
nuts. It's really weird.
I mean,
really, really weird stuff.
And the fact that this kid,
yeah. So like the question is, yeah, they didn't know that they were in that cave, but there's been an ongoing tradition. I don't know if Joe's factoring that in or if he's missing that.
shepherd kid was able to even find these scrolls that they were set up, and just has led to that point right in time where he finds this massive, basically admission that the Bible's real. You can actually look into,
The admission that the Bible's real. How? They found an ancient cache of text where they've continued a tradition. It's like proving the Quran is real. We found one of the earliest manuscripts. It does nothing of the sort.
there's a New King James, and then you can actually look into the Catholic Bible as well that also has, they call them apocrypha texts because the King James Bible doesn't acknowledge them, but there are also other books that are not considered, approved by the King James. So look, I was on my mom's side, I was actually raised Catholic and then had my catechism, did all of it. And then on my dad's side, I was raised Christian and then later on Messianic Jew. And so I feel like I kind of have like a good cross section and I've been exposed to a lot of this growing up. But it's definitely interesting.
How she calls herself Catholic and then Christian, as if Catholics aren't Christian, and then
thing. And so look, I don't tell people, like, I'm not saying that like aliens created mankind. I don't believe that, because I at the end of the day believe that God is responsible for our creation. But I do think that what we've been programmed to believe in regards to our ability to be able to use our mind, the spiritual aspect of us, really does exist. And I think that once you kind of remove yourself out of this basically rat race and you can like really reconnect with that, I think that that's when you kind of realize, hey, there's a bigger purpose here in life, and like what is our end objective. And if you're given a position of influence or a position of power and you're not doing the right thing for humanity, you're not guiding people, then that's something that you have to answer for. So I want to make sure that I'm good with God.
I hear you. That's a lot.
That was a lot that kind of doesn't really deal with what we're trying to deal with here.
I think these stories, especially when you get to stories like Noah and the Ark, and that these stories exist in basically every religion,
was awesome. He's just given amazing shout outs to Wes Huff. So we're going to go to Wes Huff explaining the book of Enoch and why exactly it did not go into the Bible.
I'm sure that me and Wes would have some overlap.
Rogan said to go check out Wes Huff, so here we go. We're checking him out.
Let's listen.
Gods have throne guardians. And within biblical Judaism, these are the seraphim and they are the cherubim. So sometimes you'll see those memes, the biblically accurate angels.
Yeah.
Those are cherubim. That's what they are.
Okay.
It's not actually an angel. It's kind of a misnomer in terms, but I get it, because we kind of broad brush with all these categories. The book of Enoch is part of the literature that's trying to explain that. What on earth is this? Actually, if you go back to my wesleyhuff.com, so every Monday I do these posts.
Okay, we're not going to waste any time. There are divinities that evolved from the term deities or gods, literally into angels, watchers that come down and they mate with women and they do some chaotic stuff in 1 Enoch, especially in the Book of the Watchers, with giants and cannibalism and all sorts of crazy stuff. I'm sure we'll have some overlap and if not agreement, because what Wes Huff does is he totes the line quite well, and then he sometimes derails from what critical scholarship tends to say about some of these things, because he's an apologist. Often he's defending his tower in a lot of ways. So we have a lot in common, but when I see someone like him chest out, I'm right, and he's telling the whole world these things, and it's like, dude, I'll call out if I think there's things wrong. In this video, if I said something mistaken, I'm sure there's some error I've said along the way. Call it out. I hope you've enjoyed this, but literally, ladies and gentlemen, if Joe Rogan does not see that there's a continuity of tradition that they are passing along, they're writing down, and this somehow he thinks miraculously ended up in a later manuscript that was just so happened to be almost identical to the older one, he's misinformed. And the guy that's closest to him should probably do a really good job of trying to make that make sense to him. But maybe he doesn't want to burn bridges with Joe. I don't know. But you really should understand that this does not take a miracle to preserve this material. If it is, then the Quran. We might as well go back to the old elephantine papyri from the 5th century BCE. Why not accept that as miraculous? I mean, just because there's a living tradition that preserves this identical book in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I'm not saying it's not fascinating. Don't let me poo-poo on it. But I'm telling you, it's no miracle. If you've enjoyed this reaction and a little bit of this education, it's a little more than reaction here, a lot more educating here. Please take the time to subscribe, hit the bell, and hit all. Like this video, drop a comment what you think down below. Do you think Joe's thinking this thing literally the way I'm describing it? Or do you think he's smarter than that and realizes that it's not like that, that there is a continuity and tradition, he's just in awe of it? I'd like to hear from you, and share this thing on your socials. I hope this gets some noise. Until next time, see you then.